What is matcha made of? This is a question we're often asked, and in this video, we're going to find out. We'll take a look at how matcha has evolved over the centuries and how it's made today. Let's get started. So when people ask what is matcha made of, the simple answer is green tea leaves. But it's so much more complicated than that. If you were to grind normal green tea leaves into a powder, you would end up with an extremely bitter flavor. So what is matcha made of then? Well, the tea leaves need to go through a long, labor-intensive production process so they are smooth enough to drink plain in powdered form. By the way, we're talking about a completely different matcha than you might find in your latte. When you hear the term ceremonial matcha, this generally means the matcha is smooth enough to be drunk plain, or at least it's intended to be. Matcha has become famous for its use in the Japanese tea ceremony. Hence the name ceremonial matcha. This matcha is not mixed in with milk and sugar. It's just mixed into water using a bamboo whisk or chasen and a clay tea bowl or chawan. If you want, you can make your own Japanese tea ceremony at home. You just need to get the bowl, the whisk, and some high quality ceremonial matcha. After traveling around Japan for the past few years, we've met with dozens of tea farmers and sampled hundreds of different types of matcha. We've ultimately selected a short list of our favorites, and you can try them all at Nioteas.com. These matchas are smooth enough to drink plain because they come from the first harvest. During the winter months, the tea plant goes into a resting phase where it stores nutrients from the soil. In the springtime, it releases all these nutrients into the light green sprouts, which are used to make the most sought-after teas in Japan, like gyokuro, sencha, and matcha. The tea plant will then produce 2 to 3 more waves of sprouts in the summer and early fall, but the nutrient density will not be nearly as high as that first spring flush. The reason the first spring harvest is so important is because the tea plant has all winter to build up nutrients and release them into the leaves. So these leaves are picked and then ground into matcha, right? Not exactly. There's still one more thing that needs to be done before the harvest. The farmer will actually cover the tea plants in a type of netting called a kabuse. To understand where this comes from, we need to go back in time a little ways. Matcha is actually the original Japanese green tea. Tea was brought over from China to Japan around 1,000 years ago, and at this time it was pressed into cakes, ground into a powder, and mixed into water. This primitive form of matcha was likely very bitter, and a lot of discoveries would need to be made before it started to resemble the super green and creamy ceremonial matcha we know today. The most important discovery arose when farmers would cover their tea plants in nets, originally made out of straw, before the harvest. This was done to keep the tea plants warm during the colder weather, but they soon found that it produced a smoother flavor in the tea. We now know that this is thanks to the presence of amino acids in the tea. These amino acids, like L-theanine, are what produce the sweet and savory flavors in a green tea. They are also the reason why tea drinkers report having this long-lasting, calm alert sensation throughout the day, without the crash or jitters normally associated with coffee. The only problem is, when the tea leaves are exposed to sunlight, the amino acids are converted into bitter catechins in order to protect the plant from the UV light. By covering the tea plant before the harvest, the leaves are able to maintain more of their sweet and savory theanine. During the shading process, the tea plant also produces more chlorophyll to compensate for the lack of sunlight. This causes the leaves to turn a darker shade of green, which produces a greener color in the final matcha. This is why we recommend to look at the color of a matcha to assess its quality. It's not that greener matcha tastes better, it's that higher quality matchas tend to be more green in color, if that makes sense. Of course, the only way to judge the quality of a matcha is to actually taste it, but this at least gets you part of the way there. So now we have our shaded, super smooth tea leaves, but how are they harvested? The youngest leaves on top of the tea plant will be the most nutrient dense, and they are also the sweetest in flavor, so these are perfect for matcha. These leaves will also be higher in caffeine because the tea plant produces caffeine to protect its leaves from insects, and these leaves are more vulnerable, so they need more protection. Once all the leaves are gathered up, they will need to be heated almost immediately. Once the leaves are picked, the enzyme oxidase will begin to convert the polyphenols into theaflavins and thearubicins, eventually producing a black tea. In order to lock in the green color and the fresh vegetal flavor profiles of the leaves, they are heated to deactivate the enzyme. After the leaves are steamed and dried, they actually have their stems removed. These stems will detract from the flavor and ultimately the color of the matcha, so they need to be removed. Once the leaves have their stems removed, they are referred to as tencha, and they are one step away from becoming matcha. They just need to be ground into a fine powder in a large stone mill. To produce high-quality, ceremonial-grade matcha, the farmer will use a large granite mill. This mill has a large network of grooves that will push the tencha leaves out as they are ground into a finer and finer powder. The finished matcha will be pushed out the sides and collected at the bottom. This mill takes a full hour just to produce 50 grams of this precious ceremonial matcha. So what is matcha made of? High quality matcha is made using the young sprouts of the first harvest. They are shaded for 3 weeks and they have their stems removed to improve their flavor. They are then carefully ground in a large stone mill to produce the final powder. All of these steps are worth it to produce a super smooth matcha flavor. This high quality matcha can hold a nice thick foam when you whisk it properly, and because the bubbles add air to the tea, it almost tastes like a latte, but without milk or sugar. If you want to try this tea, you can browse the selection of our favorite ceremonial matcha at Nioteas.com. If some of the steps are skipped in this production process, you end up with a slightly duller culinary or latte matcha. This matcha is going to have fewer nutrients and a more bitter flavor. This stronger flavor actually works great in lattes because you can taste the bold matcha flavor through the milk and sugar. If you want to try the best matcha for lattes, you can try this one we found from the talented farmer Mr. Masuda in Shizuoka. Even though it's much more affordable, it's still carefully produced without the use of pesticides or chemicals like all of our other matchas. It's just made from later harvests, so it'll be slightly more bitter, but it's much more affordable, so you can throw a few scoops into your morning latte or smoothie without feeling too bad about it. So whether you prefer your matcha plain or in a latte, I hope you found this video helpful when it comes to answering the question, what is matcha made of? If you like this video, please subscribe to see more like it in the future. Until then, we'll see you next time.